And now we turn to the political analysis of Shields and Brooks. That is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Hello to both of you. Let's start with our lead story tonight, and that is a whistleblower from the intelligence community. The word gets out, or this person is alleging that he knows that the president, in a conversation with, now we think it's the president of Ukraine, urged the president of Ukraine, Mark, to investigate Joe Biden's son. And we have there's still the president denies it, and others do, but now we have several news outlets backing up the story, and I was just handed, and you've seen it, a statement by Joe Biden. He says, if these reports are true, there's truly no bottom to President Trump's willingness to abuse his power and abuse our country. This behavior is particularly abhorrent because it exploits the foreign policy of our country and undermines our national security for political purposes. How seriously should we be taking these allegations?
I think they're enormously serious, and the fact that the Wall Street Journal is leading this story, along with the New York Times, the Washington Post. But this is not false news or fake news or anything of the sort. It's not a political vendetta of any sort, and this is quite beyond a Playboy model or a frat party at any Ivy League school or anything of the sort. This is really serious. This is totally exploiting the national security putting at risk the national security of the United States for narrow political personal interests, if in fact the reports are true. And I guess the most disturbing thing to me, Judy, was the president accused the whistleblower, who at enormous risk and required considerable courage of being an extreme partisan. Which means, A, that somebody in the White House knows who the whistleblower is. This is mafia-like threats. We know who you are, and they've investigated his political affiliation or her political affiliation. I mean, so I think it's enormously grave.
And in fact, the president, the president was saying today to the television cameras that people in the White House were making fun of all this. Are we looking at something where it's going to be a he said situation going forward?
Well, presumably the call was listened to by others and recorded. So, I'm not sure it was recorded, but it was certainly listened to. These calls it's not just a one-on-one call. There's people on the line. I think it is pretty grave. Most presidents go into the White House thinking, I'm here to serve the office. I'm here to serve America. Donald Trump is using America to serve him, and American foreign policy to serve him. And most presidents go to the office thinking that the phrase, my fellow Americans, means something, and that we have greater loyalty to our fellow Americans than we do to people in outside countries. And he's basically using another country to be oppo research on his fellow American. And I think this rises to a more level. I'm not sure this really is foundationally changing, but it rises to a different level if there's a connection between the foreign aid and the promise. That really is supporting U.S. government money for your own private gain, and that's clearly corruption of a high order.
And I mean, as both of you are saying, Mark, we don't know for a fact that this happened, but the evidence is now building, the reporting is building, and there are two strands. It is urging the leader of another country to get involved in political campaign, but then the quid pro quo. Potentially.
No, exactly, Judy. I mean, to say, look, be in touch with my Dr. Dirt, my oppo research guy, who once was America's mayor and is now doing smear.
Rudy Giuliani.
I mean, how the mighty have fallen to that point where he's an errand boy to be a hitman on political opponents. No, David put it very well. I mean, this is a total corruption of the, if it's valid and if it's accurate, and I think that the news reports are done very soberly, quite honestly, because they take their position, their mission seriously. If it's true, Judy, then I don't see how the Democrats can back off on impeachment investigation.
And I want to ask you about that because this week, David, as both of you have pointed out, the president's lawyers were in court. They were arguing against a New York lawsuit, an attempt to get the president's tax returns to be turned over, to be made public. And the president's lawyers are saying you can't investigate a president while he's sitting in office. What we're learning today in these reports about Ukraine raise questions about that.
Yeah, this was the Nixon defense with David Frost, that if a president does it, it's not illegal. It didn't work for Nixon. I'm not sure it would work for here. I mean, a basic principle of our government is that no person is above the law. And so I don't think that'll work. I am struck. I do think if there's a link to the foreign aid, the Democrats obviously have to launch a different and new investigation. I'm struck mostly by when President Trump does something out in the open, or Rudy Giuliani does something out in the open, like it doesn't become a big thing. Now that we had something secret that the press uncovered, suddenly it blows up. But Giuliani was not shy about this. And, you know, the fall of Giuliani is one of the great stories of our age. I covered him a lot when he was mayor. Extremely brilliant, extremely sharp, not the man I see today. The one continuity is that he would sit around with his staff and watch the Godfather movies over and over again.
Wow.
And the mob behavior, this really is mob behavior. It's like, let's dig up dirt on this guy. That's what it strikes me more than anything else.
Well, and again, Mark, with the president's lawyers fighting back, which they've been. I mean, they've been fighting all these attempts to get any information turned over. But this is the first time we've heard them argue a president can't be investigated.
I agree with David about the Nixon defense. Nixon, of course, invoked that defense in 1977, 3 years after he had been forced out in the interview with David Frost. But he did prove that, and by his own statement and his own actions, that no president can be above the law. I really think, you know, the gravity of this is yet to be fully appreciated.
The other major story we're watching very closely this week, David, of course, is in the aftermath of the attack on the Saudi oil complex, and the administration pointing fingers immediately at Iran, although so far we don't have absolute proof. I'm told there's just been a press conference at the Department of Defense. The Defense Secretary Esper is saying everything we have now points to Iran. President Trump's response has been first to talk about being locked and loaded, and we could do whatever we wanted to Iran. But on the other hand, today and at intervals this past week, saying, no, that's not what we want. We don't want war with Iran. Right. What do we make of this American response?
Yeah, well, you know, this happens in the Middle East, and all arrows do point to Iran. I mean, Iran has been clearly ramping up their terror activity toward the Saudis over the last several months with a bunch of these missile attacks. Second, the fact that these attacks, somehow they did it, a sophisticated enough weapon to get through. No American missile base saw them. There are a lot of American bases in the region. And so that suggests it was something more than just a small rebel army. It was a really sophisticated attack. And so what's happening is Iran is clearly testing to see what it can get away with in order to intimidate the Saudis. And the Saudis know they're very vulnerable to this kind of attack. They're trying to sell their oil company. The oil markets are their obvious bread and butter. And Iran is the country that's hegemonic or trying to be hegemonic in the region. And they've got an ideology they're trying to export. And so I think Trump is actually playing it reasonably well. I mean, it's a chess match where they launch something and then we try to frighten them, or we try to put some economic sanctions on them. And so Trump is pushing back without going crazy. And so he's not being violent. And so far, I think he's playing the game as well as you can do in this circumstance.
He's handling it well.
He's not being violent, but I think that we have to say that we are where we are today with Iran because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump withdrew on political grounds alone. That was his only basis, that Barack Obama had negotiated that agreement, the nuclear agreement, with the Iranians, with the United States and the UK and Russia, China, Germany, France, put it all together. There was 98% reduction in their capacity. They were open to inspection, and he withdrew, and there was nothing to replace it. He has no coalition partners. He has lost his coalition. We are now standing, waiting for the judgment of the Saudi prince as to whether we go to send Americans to war. I mean, what are our shared values with the Saudis? I miss those. Are they freedom of press, religion, assembly, rule of law? I mean, is there anything? I mean, I think what we've seen is that the limitations of defense sales to a country. I mean, Trump boasts over the fact we're so $4 billion. They have the 5th largest defense budget in the world, the Saudis do. And they can't even defend themselves. And, you know, they're overbuilt. They're over-muscled, and David's right. I mean, we're not going to win this, and the Iranians know we're not going to. President Trump does not want to go to war. I don't accuse me of warmonger, and he doesn't want to go to war because 2020 is coming up, and a war in the Middle East is about the last thing in the world any president wants.
Well, I should add, I just was told that another comment from the defense secretary just now. He said the U.S. will send some troops to the region, but he said it won't be in the thousands. Right. So we don't know what that means. But it's the half step, David. I think
this is what you know. You do this, I do this. We were signaling to each other. It's a dance. I think the Iranians probably know Trump is not going to do anything. He's going to send a signal, but he's not going to. He doesn't want to go to war. So they do have the upper hand on this. One area where I disagree with Mark is I don't think this is entirely due to the Iranian nuclear deal being canceled. The critics of that deal, even before it was accepted, said the problem is Iran has two bad things they're doing: the nuclear program, but the terror in the region program. And many people criticized that deal because it did nothing to address Iran's terror in the region program. And that's what this is a continuation of. It may be ramped up a little, but they've been doing this sort of thing for, well, since 1979.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here as an apologist for Iran. I'm saying there was a coherent coalition to contain and to limit Iranian activity and Iranian negative influence, and I believe it was working. And that there is no substitute. It is exactly like his health care plan. There is no substitute. I mean, dismantle what is there and replace it with nothing. And I honestly think, I mean, there's no one-off with Iran. I mean, Iran's got Syria bases. Iran has opportunities to perplex and torment us in all kinds of places.
Well, and you know, this story is now a week into it, but it looks as if we're about to see the next phase with the announcement of troops more troops going into the region.
Okay.
Mark Shields, David Brooks, thank you.